shores of the Dead Sea at the southern end of the Jordan Valley. Here, 50 years ago, in a labyrinth of ravines, priceless ancient manuscripts were discovered in a cave. The Dead Sea Scrolls were among the most important archaeological finds of the 20th century. Written around the time of Jesus, they hold precious secrets about early Judaism and the birth of Christianity. For much of their existence, war has raged around the Dead Sea Scrolls, often casting them as hostages to fortune. Over time, more scrolls have been unearthed by archaeologists. Still others, reached first by profiteers, have surfaced in Middle Eastern bazaars. Even as experts use new technology to unlock their profound meaning, the stakes grow higher, as potentially key fragments are held for ransom in the shady world of scroll traders. With each hard-won scrap, scholars are slowly piecing together the strange story of the settlement that lies east of Jerusalem at Qumran, on the edge of the Dead Sea. Here, a previously unknown sect exiled themselves. Under conditions of great hardship, they formed the community that wrote the Dead Sea Scrolls. Finding their writings is a race against time. Even as scroll traffickers haggle over the fragments, they're decomposing. But new technology is enhancing the fading images and allowing scraps to be reunited, fueling an ongoing debate about their meaning. One of the world's foremost scholars is attempting to penetrate the world of the scroll traders. He's Professor James Charlesworth of Princeton Theological Seminary. As well as writing many books on the subject, he tirelessly follows up any possible leads to new scrolls.
I have seen fragments of the Dead Sea Scrolls turn to dust. I've seen other fragments turn to water because they're so fragile. It's important for me to get them before they disappear. They've never been seen for 2,000 years, but we have to find them before they decay.
His task is not an easy one. It's a question of patience and slowly building up contacts.
Inshallah. Now we have tremendous consensus that these are sensationally important for our culture, for an understanding of what it means to be a Jew, and for what it means to be a follower of Jesus.
Charlesworth's latest leads will take him into the desert and to Bethlehem. For 50 years, the Western world has been hanging on each new scroll find, longing to know more about the birth of modern Judaism and Christianity, hoping this knowledge can promote a new harmony between these great faiths. The discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls begins in 1947 with the Bedouin, groups of Arabs who wandered the hills with their sheep and goats. The story goes that a young man, known as the Wolf, was tending his flock. Looking for a stray in a cave, he threw a stone inside, only to hear the sound of it hitting a jar. The wolf returned to his encampment with strange scrolls made of dried, stretched animal skin. It's said that the wind blew some fragments away, and children played with others. Some were used to repair sandals, and some even used for kindling. Still others found their way to an Arab trader in Bethlehem named Kondo. This was at the time of the violent birth of the State of Israel, and feelings were running high between Arabs and incoming Jews. It's said the Arab Kondo, suspecting the scrolls contained an ancient form of Jewish writing, deliberately destroyed one of them, fearing for his own safety should he be found in possession of such a precious Jewish document. When the fragments from this cave found their way into the hands of academics, they were both excited and confused. Eventually, they too were able to locate this cave, now known as Cave 1, revisited by Israeli archaeologist Hanan Eshel.
And what they found was this cave those two entrances were blocked, and the only entrance which was open is this small one. The Bedouins threw this stone into the cave, and over there the jars were standing.
On the floor beside the jars were a few tiny scraps. Here, on this fragment, they could just about make out a word. But the words were in a rare and unfamiliar form of Hebrew. Strangely, it was like Hebrew writing found inscribed on these mortuary objects. These are ossuaries, pottery receptacles for bones of the dead. Because we know when they were in use, during and just before the time of Jesus, the similarity of writing styles also dates the scrolls to that time, 2,000 years ago. Here was another fragment. Again, words could be picked out.
Into the midst of the fire, Mishrak, Shadrach, not singed.
The words were from the book of Daniel, possibly dated from as early as 150 BC, only a few copies away from the original. Why were the experts so awestruck by this discovery? Because before the Dead Sea Scrolls came to light, the earliest existing Hebrew texts were medieval, from around the 11th century AD. Now there were versions from 1,000 years earlier, from the dawn of Christianity and before, undistorted by later errors and theological censorship. But who wrote these fragments? It would seem that this newly discovered desert sect had its roots beneath modern-day Jerusalem. Around 150 years before the time of Jesus, Judaism had fragmented into a number of sects, such as the Pharisees and the Sadducees, all of whom were arguing among themselves. One group of dissident priests, rebelling at what they saw as corruption and political infighting among the temple hierarchy, left in disgust for the desert. With them they carried scrolls, books from the Hebrew scriptures. They had the book of Isaiah, one verse of which spurred them on.
A voice is crying, "In the wilderness, prepare the way of the Lord."
On the shores of the Dead Sea, at the lowest place on the face of the earth, these Jewish dissidents founded a community at the ruins of an old Jewish fort at Qumran. In the cool of the evenings, these Qumranites began to make precious copies of their Hebrew scriptures. Their writings showed that they were intellectually advanced. They developed a sophisticated solar calendar and had medical knowledge, writing about the flow of blood in the body. The Qumranites also began to write their own religious works. Conditions were harsh at Qumran. On reaching middle age, many of the community moved on. The local burial site contains hundreds of graves, but the remains are mainly young men and some women. Because these scrolls were being written at a time of much Jewish turmoil and the formation of Christianity, they provide invaluable information, particularly as there is so little other documentation from the period. But there are frustratingly few fragments. As always, new scrolls are needed. A man claiming to be the wolf, the young shepherd who discovered those first scrolls, lives in Bethlehem. Jim Charlesworth has decided to go and see if he can remember any other details.
We worked in caves and emptied them completely. There was one cave we worked one night. A small one, not a big one. We worked for a short while and found a piece of leather with nothing written on it. But the Jordanian army saw us and started firing at us. We ran away, and that was that.
Would you take me to see that cave?
I'll show you. Why not?
Following in the footsteps of the Bedouin and the archaeologists who have scoured this area looking for ancient writings, Charlesworth is hopeful that the Wolf's Cave may hold the elusive prize of more Dead Sea Scrolls.
This is good signs. We've got some pottery here, some ancient pottery. And you can see it goes down pretty deep here.
The Qumranites lived in caves and tents outside the main settlement, which they reserved for communal and sacred activities.
It looks very much like many of the crevices in which Dead Sea Scrolls had been placed. But there's no question this has been inhabited. Are we standing now on scrolls?
Archaeologists have visited this cave, but it has never been fully excavated. It's impossible to assess the layers of history at a glance. To explore it further, he'll have to get a permit. But Charlesworth has every reason to be optimistic.
Romani. Exactly what I thought. We have Roman pottery here. We have clear evidence of occupation in that one cave from the time of Isaiah down to the destruction of the 1st century. Yeah.
The impact of the wolf's first discoveries in 1947 cannot be exaggerated. Texts thought to be extinct were rediscovered. There was the complete book of Isaiah. The sheer excitement of finding the material written about in the Gospels of Jesus is recalled by a leading biblical scholar.
In the Gospel of Luke, there was a story of Jesus going into a synagogue and being given the scroll of Isaiah to read from. And now we have a scroll of Isaiah written just before Jesus' lifetime, one just like he would have been handed.
The Spirit of the Lord is upon me. He has sent me to bring good news to the poor.
But did these ancient versions make any difference? They did. The scrolls from the original cave, Cave 1, brought immediate new insights.
In Isaiah 53, verse 11, talking about the suffering servant, it says, "From the anguish of his soul he shall see." And now, the book of Isaiah from the Dead Sea Scrolls says, "He shall see light." For the community that read this, light was very important. They were the sons of light. The text means something special to them. What he sees is what they can see. It's the truth of God that they have.
As well as providing new insights into the Qumran sect, these scrolls also help clear up more mundane biblical oddities.
In Isaiah 45, we used to read, "I go before you to level the swellings," a very strange and unusual use of a Hebrew word which the dictionaries didn't really know how to represent properly. But now, in light of the Qumran scrolls, we can see there was a small scribal error, and it really should be translated, "I go before you to level the mountains." It makes much better sense in context.
But there were more than parts of the Hebrew Bible found in the cave. There were never before seen writings, including an amazing war scroll of the Qumranites.
The 1st Division shall be armed with spears to bring down the slain by the judgment of God, to pay the reward for the wickedness of all the nations of vanity.
These new writings not only brought to life the vision of the Qumranites, but the world of Jesus and the controversies he became embroiled with. For example, what to do on a Sabbath. The Qumran scrolls take a very harsh view.
On the Sabbath, thou shalt not help a goat if it falls into a pit, or even if it is crying out in need of help with a birth.
Jesus, of course, said, yes, you could, and his opponents probably agreed with him, but not these people. Even a dying animal, bottom of a pit, its owner could look down, watch it die. Sorry, it's Sabbath, I can't pull you out, you'll just have to die there.
In fact, it says in the Gospel of Luke that Jesus goes even further. He heals people on the Sabbath. The scrolls reveal how other Jewish sects saw this as totally shocking and displeasing to God. Before the discovery of the scrolls in Cave 1, the world was largely dependent on a translation of the Hebrew scriptures into Greek, known as the Septuagint, which was written by Jews living in a Greek world and perhaps colored by a Greek mindset. It has always been presumed that the translation was faithful. Now it could be checked.
The Qumran scrolls have confirmed one quite spectacular mistranslation from the book of Isaiah. A virgin shall conceive and bear a son. The Hebrew doesn't say virgin at all. It says young woman. Now, why it was translated into Greek as virgin, we don't know. We know the consequences of all that have been monumental for Christianity, but perhaps it was because the idea of virgins conceiving and gods being fathers of children was not so strange in the Greek world. But it was strange in the Jewish world, and now, thanks to the Qumran manuscripts, we know that the Jewish scriptures never had any virgins conceiving. It was a young woman.
Behold, a virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and his name shall be called
a young
Emmanuel.
woman shall conceive and bear a son, and his name shall be called Emmanuel.
Here was a cherished belief of Christianity being undermined by the Dead Sea Scrolls. Writers who had it in for Christians now saw the scrolls as a useful weapon and began to sharpen their pencils. In 1952, archaeologists, desperate for more Dead Sea Scrolls, looked in 200 caves and found nothing. It was again the Bedouin who found the second cave containing scrolls, Cave 2. And of course, why should the Bedouins say where they had discovered them? They had struck gold. Meanwhile, archaeologists began to investigate Qumran itself. A key discovery was the writing instruments of the people who had lived here.
In this room, long tables and short one, and 3 inkwells were found. One from metal, the rest from pottery. And finding 3 and the tables together point up to the point that some of the scrolls were probably copied in this room.
Other evidence, such as ritual immersion pools and dining areas, confirmed that this was the headquarters of the community. Archaeology was beginning to add to the understanding of the Dead Sea Scrolls. Recently, this piece of pottery was discovered. Although it's difficult to read, its writing style is identical to that of the scrolls, again linking the scrolls in the caves to the site of Qumran. A third cave was found, and then came the jackpot, Cave 4. This yielded thousands of fragments. It could well have been their library. Once again, the Bedouin got there first. These fragments were in very poor condition. What's worse, the academics' lust for knowledge was matched by the lust of some Bedouin traders for maximizing the scrolls' earning power, resulting in the traders deliberately cutting up scrolls to make more fragments, to make more money. And so Cave 4's destructive cycle went on. Eventually, 15,000 pieces were purchased. A worldwide effort was made to raise money to pay scroll traders like Kondo. Even the Vatican made a substantial contribution. Finally, archaeologists found the cave. Excavating its floor, they were horrified to find the fragments not in jars, but lying among worms, ants, and a thick layer of bat droppings. How to make sense of all these decaying fragments? Professor Lawrence Schiffman, a leading Jewish scholar at NYU, is trying to cast new light onto Jewish history of 2,000 years ago.
There you go. Thank you. Imagine that you had a New York Times, let's say, and you took only 10 of its pages and then ripped them up and then took 10% of what was on the floor, and now you try to get a sense what is the New York Times. That's really the boat we're in with the Dead Sea Scrolls.
Even with so little to go on, the scrolls were beginning to rewrite the birth of modern Judaism and Christianity. Here in Cave 4 were fragments from the first book of Samuel that had never been seen before. It was like finding extra verses to a Shakespeare sonnet. During the 1950s, more caves were discovered. In 1956, the last cave to date, Cave 11, was found by the Bedouin. This one was a treasure trove. Up to 2 years later, fragments from this cave were still being sold by Kondo to private buyers. But the biggest scroll of all, over 28 feet long, he hid under his floorboards in a shoebox where it was to remain for a decade. The mass of tiny fragments that were purchased from the scroll traders by academics found their way to the Jordanian Antiquities Museum in Jerusalem, known as the Rockefeller. So enormous was the task of putting these tiny pieces together that the whole process of publishing them became frustratingly slow.
For a whole variety of reasons, the original team, after they assembled the jigsaw puzzle, was not able to get it published. Now, these reasons included illness, alcoholism, death, lack of interest, Israeli-Arab politics. Finally, really what happened was that there was so much pressure to get this thing published. The assignments were given out again, and I would say that by 1991, we were really on the way to getting the material published as it should be.
Are there more fragments from these caves still to come to light? Jim Charlesworth thinks there are. Perhaps in Israel's Arab neighbor, Jordan. His search moves to the capital, Amman. It's a good place to look for scrolls, as many Arabs from the vicinity of Qumran moved east into Jordan when Israel occupied the West Bank.
Now, how does one continue in this task of looking for scrolls or looking for fragments? You first of all listen. You get to know people, and pretty soon you learn, you hear things. There are, of course, circles in which you hear about basketball or cricket, and other circles in which you hear about scrolls, and the rumors that, hey, have you heard that? And you follow that up, and lo and behold, every now and then you find out, I cannot believe what we have found today.
On this trip, Charlesworth's contacts point him south, into the desert, to Petra.
Petra was a magnificent trading center when the Dead Sea Scrolls were being copied. I'm eager to meet some of the Bedouin whom I've been talking to, and there may be some information there, and perhaps even more than information that I need to check out.
Charlesworth is convinced that every rumor, however vague, needs to be pursued.
Beyond the fragments, I have no doubt that there are real scrolls, full scrolls, lengthy scrolls, well over 20 feet long, that are in this area, and they're moving them out. And they're not in the hands of Bedouins, but through the Bedouins I can get fragments and get words about where this other material is.
Here at Petra, the Bedouin are acting as archaeological excavators, digging as they did in Qumran several decades earlier. Experience shows that it's the Bedouin who are most likely to know the whereabouts of any new discoveries.
The Bedouins from Qumran, they come to Petra?
Sometimes.
Sometimes?
Sometimes, yeah.
You speak the same language? Caravan?
Caravan.
What do they bring with them?
Bring some salt from Dead Sea.
Have you seen antiquities come over?
But this the story before my life.
The first meeting doesn't yield any immediate results, but that's not unusual. Getting information from the Bedouin is a long process of gaining their trust. And in the turbulent world of Middle Eastern politics and culture, Charlesworth has to tread cautiously.
See, it's very hard to sift this out because the last thing a Palestinian Bedouin would want would be to let them get in the hands of the people they claim are their enemies.
With all his contacts leading, for the moment, to dead ends, Charlesworth heads back to Jerusalem. Here, in the 1950s, the business of piecing together existing scrolls had taken a sinister turn. Not only had the pace of publication slowed, but open hostility was breaking out. One of the team leaked stories to the press regarding the contents of fragments dated around 100 years before Jesus. And the news was spreading among biblical scholars.
Some academics were suggesting the unthinkable, that in fact the scrolls were giving us a Christianity before Christ. For example, that the teacher of righteousness, the founder of the community, was put to death, perhaps even crucified, and was expected to return again. Another text speaks of a group of 12 in the community.
This possible reference to Jesus' 12 disciples, a century before they were thought to have lived, gave those atheist academics more ammunition. If exact events and dates in the New Testament could be questioned, then perhaps Christianity would collapse like a house of cards. Finally, the Vatican was accused of suppressing the Dead Sea Scrolls by the one member of the Scrolls team who was not a Christian, John Allegro. He was convinced that other team members were involved in a cover-up.
John Allegro believed that his colleagues, many of whom were Roman Catholics, were deliberately suppressing what they knew and were not publishing because they were afraid that they would destroy their own faith. In fact, in one letter that he wrote to one of his colleagues, he says, "When I finish, there won't be any Catholic Church."
But a sudden event was to change this undermining operation dramatically. In June 1967, Israel and her Arab neighbors suddenly found themselves at war. It would be over in 6 days. Israeli troops fought hard for the Rockefeller Museum, with its strategic position overlooking the city walls of Old Jerusalem. There was another prize to win by taking the Rockefeller, its precious collection of Dead Sea Scrolls. Soon, Israeli soldiers had seized the whole of Jerusalem and were worshiping at the remains of their ancient temple. Another area taken by Israel was Bethlehem. One general knew exactly what to tell his troops to look for. Kondo's antiquities shop was raided, and there, under the floorboards, was the shoebox. Carefully undoing the wrapping revealed the intact parchment 28 feet long. The Israeli soldiers had found the apocalyptic temple scroll.
This scroll finally disposed of any ideas that the Qumranites might have been an early version of Christianity. This is a very Jewish scroll. It's all about how to observe the law of Moses. It's about how to run the temple cult. It's definitely nothing that would ever have found its way into the New Testament.
It seemed that the main goal of the Qumranites was bringing about a new and perfect temple, the fitting abode for God. What's more, when the Qumran community had made the conditions right, the wicked would be destroyed and the temple built supernaturally by God himself.
When this temple is built, you shall kill 2 yearling lambs every day, and let their blood and fat be burnt, to make a perpetual sacrifice of soothing odor to the Lord.
This sect was dedicated to an extraordinary vision of a temple. They were definitely not an early version of Christianity. The Qumranites saw their community as a substitute temple until God built his own, which explains why they behaved with such obsessive ritual purity.
The Qumran community was very concerned to limit access to its meals. Only fully initiated members were allowed to join in, whereas Jesus eats with tax collectors and sinners and is mocked for so doing.
So that would seem to be that. Or was it? Christianity and the Qumran sect had hugely different beliefs, but those gospel-like fragments still had uncanny parallels. Jim Charlesworth has found a resurrection reference in a fragment at the Rockefeller Museum.
To the dead ones, he shall give life. This is the only passage that in the Dead Sea Scrolls clearly refers to the resurrection of the dead. It's left of the...
What could explain these ideas of the Qumranites being part of Christianity?
Rather coarse,
It could be that some of those who joined Jesus had spent time at Qumran. Many think that John the Baptist was from there. He talked about his desert roots and his hatred for the sects that had originally caused the Qumranites to leave Jerusalem.
I am the voice shouting in the desert. You Pharisees and Sadducees are snakes. Who told you that you could escape from the punishment God is about to send?
A Qumran scroll recently reconstituted adds to the growing evidence that some of the ideas in Christianity evolved from Qumran writings. This scroll contained a passage with a list of blessings.
Blessed is he with a pure heart, and does not slander. Blessed are those who hold to wisdom's precepts, and do not hold to the ways of iniquity. Blessed are those who rejoice in wisdom, and do not burst forth in
This
ways
is a form of teaching familiar to Christians as the Beatitudes.
Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn.
It's new fragments like these that are the most significant pieces of the jigsaw puzzle to date to explain what Christianity was and how it came into being.
This is the most important thing about the Dead Sea Scrolls. It finally enables us to see what Judaism in the time of Jesus was like. It wasn't a single monolithic religion. It was highly varied, and it was full of sects, each of them with a different kind of Judaism. This now explains how Christianity itself arose as a Jewish sect.
Christianity, it now seems, took its ideas from a variety of other Jewish sects, one of which we now know, since the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls, was the Qumranites. It was Christianity's unique mix of those ideas that seemed to be the key to its survival. To understand this process better, more scrolls information is needed. Professor Charlesworth hopes to oblige. He struck out in Jordan, but is following up a lead in Jerusalem.
Just a few days ago, a man came to me from East Jerusalem, an Arab, and he said, we've made contact with some Bedouin who allegedly hid some scrolls south of here, maybe 2 hours drive south of Jerusalem. We better be serious and follow this up. And that's because we've seen fear in the eyes of some of the Arabs, and that connects not with it being a wild goose chase, but there may be something very important here.
The lead takes Charlesworth to Jerusalem's old city and a meeting with an Arab middleman. He hopes to be put in touch with the Bedouin scroll owners.
They just arrived now and they're waiting until it's dark so they can come. It's a lot of money they're talking about. For them it's something they kept for 27 years. It's not a joke.
Do you have any idea when they'll be here then?
They didn't want to give. They are bit suspicious, you know what I mean?
You know what we're talking about? We're into smuggling. Didn't even dream of doing it.
I'm taking off.
In this whole enterprise, you're working with a real danger. There is no way I'm going to be involved in anything like smuggling a scroll out of a country or a fragment out. My principle is very simple. Where the scroll is or where the fragment is, we should try to keep it and find ways to have it preserved, photographed, so that scholars can learn about it and share what they know with whoever is interested.
Sometimes waiting is the hardest part. Charlesworth's patience pays off, in one way, but not as he'd wished.
We have here the scroll of Esther that is lined horizontally and vertically so that Hebrew can be hung on it and written right to left, precisely as in the Dead Sea Scrolls. But we're looking for a scroll that's 2,000 years old, not 50 years old. This is not an ancient scroll, and that's all the difference in the world.
In spite of the disappointment that it's only 50 years old, Charlesworth buys it, hoping the transaction will lead to being offered a genuine one. Back at Qumran, on the shores of the Dead Sea, The hunt for documents still in caves but undiscovered by the Bedouin goes on. Archaeologist Hanan Eshel hasn't given up searching in spite of the fact that there's been no new scroll discovery since 1965. He has reasons to be optimistic.
When I started doing my research, people told me, look, there's no more chance. In 1986, we enter a cave west of Jericho. And in this cave, first of all, we found guns that were hidden there, probably after the Six-Day War. And then we excavated the cave and we found 6 documents from the Bar Kokhba period, 1 document which is earlier from the Persian period in the same cave. In 93, we found 30 documents lying outside the cave. So it happened to me twice, once in 86 and another time in 93, where I'd found documents in the Judean desert.
Today, with the help of archaeologists like Hanan Eshel and the understanding that has grown from the Dead Sea Scrolls themselves, a fuller picture of Qumran, with its ritual pools and waterways, is being built up. Can this knowledge help to explain what happened to this community? Why did the Qumranites die out when Christianity and Rabbinical Judaism, who shared many of the same beliefs, are still active today? The Qumranites' Manual of Discipline offers little insight. In fact, their prayers are very beautiful. They prayed each morning facing the rising sun.
Blessed art thou, O Lord, who art righteous in all thy ways. You have created the morning as a sign to reveal the dominion of light, for the light is good. And when night comes, you shall study for 1/3 of the darkness.
Nothing, it would seem, in those activities to indicate their downfall. For 200 years, this community lived out its idealistic lifestyle, convinced as they wrote and copied their scrolls, they were preparing the way for their God. Maybe a clue to their downfall is to be found in their later writings. As the community approached its end, their writings began to take on a more warlike tone.
They look forward to a final battle in which the forces of light would defeat the forces of darkness. They're very similar to Christianity. Christianity also in the book of Revelations has a description of the final defeat of the forces of evil by the victorious angel Michael.
As they lived out their ritually pure lives, they waited for leaders who would precipitate a universal battle marking the end of time.
My own feeling about this group is kind of two-sided, double-edged sword. On the one hand, I have tremendous respect for many of their teachings, for their devotion, for the beautiful compositions that they produced, the willingness to sacrifice anything for what they understood as God's way of life. On the other hand, there are really some teachings that are hard to agree with. They believe that in the end of days, they themselves and all those who would associate with them by coming to see the light, basically, by realizing who is right in all this, would be saved. Everybody else, Jews and non-Jews, would die.
The sad end to this sect didn't go according to plan. In 68 AD, when the Roman expeditionary force under Vespasian camped nearby on their way to put down a Jewish revolt in Jerusalem, they encountered the Qumranites. Hastily hiding their precious scrolls in nearby caves, they might have followed the plans from their own war scroll for a final battle. Did the Qumranites throw themselves onto Roman swords, confident that angel warriors would be at their side? To date, we don't know. They were either killed or fled. Only a layer of ash and a few Roman sandal nails tell of the end of a sect that had become self-obsessed and warlike. Soon, the Romans were to destroy the temple in Jerusalem, hurling its giant stone blocks to the street below and scattering the Jews to the corners of the earth. Is there more to tell of the sad story of the Qumran community? Jim Charlesworth believes there is. In his endless search for fragments of the scrolls, he's now back in America. This time, he's in luck, and in his own backyard. Charlesworth knows that just 20 minutes west of New York City, in Teaneck, New Jersey, there are scrolls, parts of which are illegible. He is hoping to persuade the Syrian Orthodox Cathedral of St. Mark to allow some of their partly decomposed fragments to be subjected to new digital analysis. It's just possible that hidden text could be revealed. The fragments were brought here in 1948 by Athanasius Samuel, Jerusalem's Syrian Orthodox Archbishop at the time. His scroll fragments are now in the care of Reverend John Mino.
This is just a beautiful liturgical scroll.
This is one of the fragments that His Eminence did keep, and he wished to be maintained by the church here.
Let me see the other fragment.
Certainly. There is a second fragment here, Jim, that you may want to take a look at.
That's beautiful. This writing is so clear, but I'm very curious if we can get some readings into this area where the leather has turned to liquefaction, where the leather collapses because of the absorption of liquid. And of course, we can't see anything in here now with the naked eye, but it will be very exciting if we can get some readings there.
Having secured the church's agreement, these ancient scrolls are on their way to an encounter with the cutting edge of technology. In upstate New York, the Rochester Institute of Technology has teamed up with Xerox Laboratories to resurrect the writings of the Qumran people. The latest digital equipment is being used by high-tech scroll hunters. Doctors Roger Easton and Robert Johnston of the Institute of Technology and Dr. Keith Knox of Xerox have been developing a new image processing technique. They believe it will reveal writing on scrolls that hasn't been seen for 2,000 years.
Monochrome separation took place.
Until now, the technique has been tested only on photographs.
Do you want to bring back different images again, you mean?
Using technology designed for the space program, each fragment is filmed through a range of filters. The image will then be rebuilt electronically.
Okay, 160.
II filter in place?
30.
See Hadash.
Yes.
On this fragment that we have never seen writing before.
That better?
Oh my! Holy cow!
Look at that.
Unbelievable!
There you go, there, Jim. There you go. There's some data.
Unbelievable! Unbelievable! Look at those! Look at that coming out!
Between the righteous and the wicked, the annihilation of our tormentors.
Virtually, we discovered another scroll here. Noise that
These
is
are
in
not
each
obvious
can't
extracts from the Hebrew
but
Bible.
the other comes out so clearly.
The last line tantalizes.
For that is why you created us.
Why indeed? The all-important answer is missing.
BCE.
Charlesworth decides to look at a second scrap with handwriting suggesting that it was written by the same person. The phrase, "the produce of the earth," can just be made out. But is there anything legible in the decomposed area of that fragment?
Let's see what we have. Oh my goodness.
Look at that.
Oh look, we can get something in here now.
Here are new phrases.
The turn of the year, as heavy dew upon.
Taking the infrared scrap from the first image and putting it in front of the two scraps of the second reconstitutes what appears to be a hymn for Harvest Festival. The hymn can now be put together.
Well, now we have these new readings. We really have very interesting text that we can read for the first time.
The festival of our peace. The fruit became plump, due to the heavens and the produce of the earth for living things. So we give thanks to your name forever.
The scrap that contained the enigmatic words, "That is why you created us," now is reunited with its fuller phrase to tell us why the Qumranites believed they had been created.
Blessed is the Lord who causes us to rejoice, for that is why you created us.
created to rejoice with God.
For these people, praising the Lord was the whole purpose of creation. And of course, if we can't understand that, we can't understand Judaism at all.
It's like we've discovered a new document, or it's like discovering a new manuscript, or another Dead Sea Scroll has been found. Now we can understand Jesus' language in terms of its own time, rather than saying, I'll tell you what it means, and make it up as we go along. We cannot make it up anymore.
Now, this is fascinating because this little fragment allows us to read then the whole passage here, which goes, and you renewed our covenant by a vision of glory and the words of your Holy Spirit. So here we've got in one phrase two important ideas shared between the Dead Sea Scrolls and the New Testament. A new or renewed covenant and the Holy Spirit.
These are two more Qumranite concepts that have found their way into Christianity.
It's a very important way of exploring a dark period in history. The Dead Sea Scrolls then are like the giant flashlight that shines into a lost corridor of history.
It seems now science is becoming the partner of religion rather than its archenemy, bathing the Bible in a new light of understanding. Today, scientists can even determine the DNA of the individual sheep and goat skins from which the scrolls were made to help group and match the fragments together. Studying the scrolls now shows the fluidity of different variations of Judaism, a process just as active today and a way of ensuring that Judaism moves with the times.
You could say that the scrolls send us a message across the 2 millennia. That message for us today, I think, is to understand the extent to which the variegated nature of Judaism in that period gave birth, on the one hand, to Rabbinic Judaism, but on the other hand, through a whole variety of transmogrifications and changes and all this, to Christianity as well, which teaches that Christianity has its roots in Judaism and therefore comes to tell us the importance of the kinds of relations between the two groups that we would hope would be there for the future.
And for those who believe there is more to be discovered, that more scrolls are to be found, the search continues.
There is good reason to continue to look, and I'm sure that Cave 12 will be found. I really hope that I will take part in this adventure.
What about it? Am I going to continue to look for scrolls and fragments of scrolls? Absolutely. So I shall keep looking as long as I live, because I've said it repeatedly, I think the great discoveries are yet to be made.